call it that because it's the common term. Our president has used it himself. I don't use it as a pejorative term, so please don't take it that way. I take it as much more convenient to use than the Patient Portability and Affordable Care Act. It's just cumbersome. PPACA is even worse. And I don't consider it health reform, so I will not be using that term. As a nurse, one of the first things I noticed, in fact, even before I became a nurse, I was a nurse's aide. We had to pull 90-plus-year-old people out of bed at 5:30 in the morning because there are regulations that dictate how many hours may pass between supper and breakfast in a nursing home. I'm sorry, but as a human being, I feel that once you've retired, you've earned the right to sleep in if you so desire. There should be nobody hauling you out of bed because breakfast has to be at a predetermined time. I thought, as a nurse's aide, it'll be better when I'm a nurse. I'll have a degree, people will respect what I do, and I'll be able to determine how I take care of my patients between them and me. I was wrong. It only got worse. And each year there have been more regulations piled up. And when Obamacare was first proposed, I said, you've got to be kidding me. The whole thing has to blow up into a million pieces and start over already, and they're adding a federal program to it. It's only going to get worse. And unfortunately, I was right. I'm not going to belabor the evils of Obamacare here for you today. The news has been full of it. I feel you all probably know as much as you need to know about that. If you have questions about it, by all means feel free to ask them and I'll be happy to answer them at the end. What I want to do with you today is go back. The title of my speech is Obamacare, What Would the Founders Say? And I want to take you way back, not just to the Constitution, but to what our founders thought about when they wrote the Constitution. What are our first principles as a country? The people who came here came primarily from Europe, and out of that, primarily from England. They brought with them the English common law. They also spoke and thought in terms of the natural law and in terms of Christianity. And in order to incorporate those into our thinking, it sounds a little bit high-minded to use those descriptors, but if you've ever heard of a new policy or something in the news and you say, you've got to be kidding me, why are they fixing it when it's not broken? If you've ever used that argument, that is a common law argument. If it's worked for 1,000 years, why change it now? That's a common law argument. Common law is just the way we do things. Natural law is another one. You say that there's no way that's going to work, that goes against nature. That's a natural law argument. And then, of course, with Christianity, those of you who are Christians will realize hearing verses go through your head, thou shalt not. Some of the policies that have been passed and supported by law in recent years. So thinking with first principles or thinking constitutionally, you can also go back to some of the other writings of that era. How many of you have read the Federalist Papers? Or dipped into them on occasion? Yes. There are a couple of them that apply directly to health insurance and what we see with our policies today. You might want to see these for your repertoire. Federalist 72, Madison, simply describes the fact, the phenomenon, that as there are more and more regulations, people will simply find more workarounds. And the regulators, whatever effect it was that they wanted, they're going to get less of that effect. The founders said, instead of writing more and more regulations saying, do this way, and thus, and so, and line upon line upon line, which no one is going to be able to keep track of anyway. You'd have to write thousands of regulations to get what they call positive law, describing how people should do things. It's better to write negative law. You can write very few laws, do no harm. covers a lot of territory. It leaves you free as a professional, as someone knowledgeable about your area of expertise, to provide your service without causing harm. Federalist 47 is another one, enacting and executing the same role in one entity is the definition of tyranny. The founders held to the Old Testament verse, the Lord is our king, the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver. They saw those three roles as being together only in God. When it came to man, they needed to be separated. That's why we have the three branches in our governments, both federal and state. We can see in our, especially the federal departments and agencies, many of them have all three of those roles combined into one agency. If any of you have ever dealt with the IRS or the DNR or the EPA, you know that they pass a regulation, you have a problem with it, or they have a problem with you, it's those people you get to deal with in executing it. And if they take you to court, it's one of their courts. It's not what we call a Title III court under the Constitution that you deal with first. It's all their policy and their administration. And that's why everybody hates agencies. They're very difficult to deal with because essentially they're mini tyrannies. So that's sort of our founding principles in the background. The departure from that came in two tracks. One is the legal track, and one is more of a cultural, where the people were living mentally and spiritually kind of track. And I'd like to trace those out for you. Let's start with a court case that describes a little bit more the way the founders thought. And I'm going to have you put on your thinking caps and answer the question for me once we get through the details of the case. It was called Paul v. Virginia, 1869. So think about it. A New York insurance salesman is going to Virginia to sell insurance. He refused to pay for a license to do business in this state, a special license for an out-of-state salesman, on the grounds that it infringed on his privileges and immunities under the Constitution. It did go all the way to the Supreme Court. He said that the Supreme Court should defend his right under the Commerce Clause. So what's your opinion? Should this man have to buy a special license from out of state? Or is it a matter of commerce that he should be able to go anywhere in the U.S. and sell his insurance from New York at will?
You want my opinion?
Yes.
My opinion is, the state says that's the way to do business, that's the way you do it.
Got it. States' rights. Yeah? Any other opinions out there? All right. As it happens, the Supreme Court agreed with you, ma'am, right down the line. They said individual privileges and immunities would apply. If he were going as a pack peddler, state to state to state, he's selling goods, and he's selling as an individual. What you see is what you get. Don't buy any wooden nutmegs, right? But and he was selling an intangible, and he was selling as part of a corporation. A corporation does not have all the same rights as an individual, and a corporation is an entity of an individual state. You incorporate under a state's laws. And so they said, number one, the individual privileges and immunities does not apply, and number two, and this is the big one for our purposes, commerce does not include insurance. Insurance is not a good that you can hold in your hand. It's a contract for a future service. It's an intangible. And that decision held for many, many years. We'll get into when it failed. But first, the drive for nationalized health care began strongly in the U.S. in 1914. The socialists / progressives looked over the ocean at Germany and said, oh, their social security system, look at that, nationalized provision for everybody. We should have that mandatory insurance. Everybody has to participate. But because of Paul v. Virginia, they had to lobby individual states. They could not go to Congress to have a law passed. And this is an interesting story because it tells us who the natural allies are for and against nationalized health care. Guess which states they went to first and made the most progress? Massachusetts was not one of them in this case. Think bigger. New York. And California. California got the furthest, the fastest. They were ready to pass it. Make it mandatory for everyone in the state to buy insurance and to be on the state plan. When the insurance companies heard about it, and they said, "You've got to be kidding me, this is the end of our livelihood. If you mandate it, we have no competition, we have no more market transparency, our product is gone." And so they lobbied the state capitol and they won. The bill was struck down. Over in New York, the other natural ally or foe, depending on where they land, the agitators, the people that were working for this, they approached the State Medical Society. And down in Albany, the elected board of the State Medical Society said, "You know, that sounds like a great idea. Our doctors will be able to be paid better, everybody will have insurance, yeah, let's go for it." Back upstate New York, James Rooney, a physician, heard about it and said, "You've got to be kidding me. That's our constitutional rights down the hopper." And he went and lobbied every single county medical society in the entire state, one at a time, and talked to them. And they stormed Albany, they deposed the entire medical board, and went to the legislature and said, "Deal's off." Not happening. And that was the end of nationalized health care in the 19-teens. It's been proposed approximately every 10 to 15 years, again, ever since. Sometimes as a bill, sometimes as I would say strongly, every period like that, every 10 to 15 years, ever since. So, as far as Paul v. Virginia and that decision went, excuse me, 1946. I don't know if anybody here can anybody remember those days, the end of FDR's term, end of World War II? Your parents would have remembered it. FDR had basically bullied the Supreme Court into submission. The court tends to follow the rest of the country as far as being conservative and maybe a generation back because of their longevity, their lifespan. So legally, they were still back a couple generations, and FDR wanted it with him now. So he said, "You know what? You're going to have mandatory retirement, and you're going to have 10 members added." And they said, "Oh, well, if you're that determined about it, okay." And so suddenly he had a Supreme Court that was making his decisions. Southeastern Underwriters Association, USV Southeastern Underwriters Association. They revisited the commerce question. Long story short, this insurance company was a monopoly. It spread over the whole southeastern seaboard, many states. They engaged in terrible business practices, price fixing, they did boycotts, they coerced people. They needed to be slapped down in the worst way. For that last 70 years, the Supreme Court and the Congress had held, it's the job of the states. States need to take care of that. And of course, they had the laws to do so. But in this case, they hadn't done much regulation of insurance, and insurance had thrived. As a whole, the insurance business of the United States handled more money annually than the U.S. government. It's a $37 billion industry, even back then. They held more financial stock than all the farmland and all the farm buildings in the whole U.S. It was a powerful, powerful entity. So the court said, Yeah, we're basically going to take back all that territory and say, yes, you're governor underneath the US Congress, and they completely reversed the previous decision of Paul v. Virginia. They used outright lies, and they even insulted Congress in their notes and said, if you don't want to deal with this, you're going to have to write another law, and here's what you can put in it. So the next year Congress did. They took it up. They passed the McCarran-Ferguson Act, but guess who actually wrote it?
Insurance company.
Essentially, the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, wrote the bill for them. Insurance had been one of the prime movers behind the change. And the reason is, if you think about it, if you're running a business and you're running it nationwide, do you want to have to deal with 50 different state laws on a matter? No, you don't. It's going to be a step, it's going to be an impediment in your path. So McCarran-Ferguson did give back a lot of control to the states, but they kept a certain amount at the federal level, and we've been building on that ever since, gradually increasing federal control over insurance. We've known from the beginning, from insurance and actuarial types, that Obamacare was unsustainable. As a program, it would not work. I believe from my reading and study of it that it was designed to be the tipping point, to make life so uncomfortable for all of us, from the people in the street to the legislators in DC, to the insurance companies, to the hospitals, to the state legislatures, to make life so uncomfortable for all of us that fully socialized health care, one payer in the United States would appear attractive. That would appear as a solution. Forget that, that was a half measure. We have to go all the way. The government has to just control all of it because it's such a mess. I think that was the intent, and we are in the mess. There's no doubt about it. The program itself, as far as it goes with controlling the insurance aspect of care, has already been blamed for over 1 million deaths. As a nurse, I can tell you that my time has been increasingly absorbed by the documentation requirements, the regulatory requirements of both government and insurance companies. I think most of my career, close to 50% of my time, has been spent meeting regulatory requirements rather than providing patient care. I've heard reports now that it's up to 75%. And my question of whoever's out there as motion study experts or whatever, at what point do you reach complete gridlock? That you're completely unable to provide the care because you're so busy meeting the regulations. One of the signs, I believe, will be that black market care will increase. That you're going to do care off the books because it's impossible to do it on the books. And I have already heard a couple reports of that.
Do you prefer no regulation?
That is such a good question. Let me give a quick wrap up and come back to that, if I may. So I want to congratulate the groups who have been opposing the steps of implementation at the state level. Michigan stopped the state exchange and the partnership exchange being implemented. And I congratulate you because that is the vital link for Obamacare. Without the exchange, it cannot be implemented. Our information stays essentially private between us, the physician, and whichever insurance company you may have involved. Once you've got an exchange in place, all that information becomes available to the federal government. It hooks up to the federal hub, and your privacy is essentially gone. They've already postponed their IT security check deadline to September 30, the day before the exchanges are supposed to open. So the next exchange coming down the pipe for us is the federal exchange. Michigan defaulted, which, by the way, no one in the US ever thought would happen. Michigan is considered to be, especially medical health care-wise, a pretty liberal progressive state. I think we have Ann Arbor to thank for that, the medical colleges. But regardless, it was the next day after the failure of the partnership exchange, that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, announced that the states were being obstructive and that certain things would have to be postponed. So Michigan has a lot to congratulate itself for. We're thinking about what is foundational to care, what is foundational to insurance, and kind of thinking outside the box. With Obamacare slowing down and more people seeing the flaws, I would say the inherent flaws to it. I even have liberals asking me, okay, you don't like it, what do you have that's better? And it's time for us to think about that. In Michigan, we've dealt this full summer with Medicaid expansion, another aspect of Obamacare. How many of you have been following that particular? Okay. You probably know there are 3 bills. There's the original one written by Rep. Lori. 4714 is the House bill number. There's the second one written by Representative Caswell. And there's the third one written by Senator Colbeck. I believe all 3 of them expand Medicaid. And just a quick question, how many of you have been following closely on the bill that Pat Colbeck has put out? Okay, I won't go terribly deep into that then. But just to ask the question, when you think expansion of a medical program, or a federal program, do you think that its expansion means spending more money? Or do you think it means including more people in it? Or both? Yeah. I would say either or both. If it provides more services, it's expansion. If it includes more of the population, takes a bigger piece of the pie, if you will. As it happens, Pat Colbeck's bill was very conflicting to a lot of Tea Party people because it purports to save money. But it also specifically says that it will increase the number of people within the program by at least 400,000. So that's a hefty chunk of Michiganders who would be basically put onto Medicaid. I'm not in favor at all. To me, that's because as a nurse, I went into it because I feel it's a calling. I'm answerable to God for what I do when I take care of you in that bed, that I give you the best care I have available, and that I am strictly honest with you about your condition, that I don't release your information to anyone else who shouldn't have it. And what kind of assurance can a regulation give you above that? Above looking in the eye the person who's actually caring for you. So to answer your question, sorry, I don't want to go too deep there, I would say extremely little. Name me a regulation that truly helps people.